Hello, and welcome back to Eric Likes Animals podcast, the podcast that talks about animals and conservation. I'm your host, Eric Mahan. I hope you guys had a good month off since the last time we've chatted. Like I said in the last episode a month ago, it's been a pretty busy month, but hey, got through it. Everything is all situated, so I'm glad to be back with you guys to talk more about animals and conservation. And speaking of conservation, why don't we just get started with some conservation news? So, the first article I want to talk to you guys about is referred to as surprisingly bad acting is key to jumping spider survival. So, this article talks about how these tiny jumping spiders that are out there, one of them has this kind of imperfect ant impression, which lets it mimic multiple species of ants. And since ants are one of the top predators and not a lot of other animals, even if they're much bigger than ants, really want to mess with them, this spider is using kind of that fear or caution from other predatory invertebrates to maybe not pick on this spider, thinking that it's an ant. And how this ant does it is it will use its front legs to kind of mock or copy the antenna swaying of an ant, as well as how its legs and jiggling its abdomen actually copies an ant's gait. Now, ants are normally considered predators or not something many want to mess with because a lot of ant species have spiny defenses and, of course, big venomous jaws. And normally, if you pick on one ant, you're picking on the whole colony. So even if you're an insect that could probably take out one ant, you really don't want to mess with that family. The jumping spider that does this, a interesting new study was performed on it, which is that it is actually not a perfect performance. It's actually designed to be imperfect, because that's not so much of a bad thing, because enabling this kind of imperfect movement where this spider isn't quite copying one specific ant species, it ends up being where instead of one perfect mimic, it kind of is a somewhat good mimic of multiple species. And copying multiple different species of ants means a much broader spectrum of predators that wouldn't want to normally mess with you, because not every ant species is something that predators would back off from. Some predators actually purposely attack certain species of ants. And by copying in a performance that the predator could be thinking to itself, maybe it's this ant, maybe it's not. You know what? I would rather just not take that risk. It actually makes it so that predators are less likely to attack it. Now, they did say that it doesn't always work. They tried this against some of the mimicking spiders, top predators, a praying mantis, and actually carnivorous spiders. And for a praying mantis that normally doesn't really care, it still attacked it even when it thought it was an ant. But luckily enough, the predatory spider did back off when it thought that it was going up against an ant. So the mimic doesn't always work, and that's when they also discovered that even these mimicking jumping spiders that are acting like ants have a backup plan. Now, they weren't able to do it in the experiment with the praying mantis, which is why it ate it, but the other part of this study was that they then looked at the colorations of this spider, because it's full of brilliant flecks of metallic oranges, reds, and blues, and that's not quite the same as a lot of the ants, but is pattern seen visually on a lot of different species of plants in the region that they're found. So they actually were able to discover a couple different species of plants and use that along with these spiders against these predators. And both of those times, the predator couldn't find the spider at all because it, matched the jasmine plant, for example, that it was hiding on. So not only can it mimic, but it can also camouflage away. And that's just showing off more of the spider's survival skills, helping it survive out in this predatory world. So yeah, definitely really cool. And jumping spiders also are fairly cute spiders. So really wanted to share that article. Now, moving on to the next, we're going to be talking about how the RSPB calls for the suspension of game bird release over avian flu fears. Now, First off, if you're in America, you're like, what is the RSBP? This article is coming from the UK. So if you're wondering what that means, basically this is the UK's version of like fish and wildlife and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, so they've noticed that avian influenza, which is devastating us and devastating all kinds of countries around the world, it's catastrophic for tens of millions of different birds, and especially game birds, which is named for the fact that, well, we hunt them for game a lot of time. So because of this, RSPB did not want to take the chance of releasing game birds into the wild for people to hunt, because you're then kind of possibly putting a more stress on the environment than the environment can take right now. Now, game birds, for the most part, have been researched and figured out that introducing them into these areas do not normally, under normal circumstances, cause issues in the environment. So, for example, over here in the United States, ring-necked pheasants are a great example. Okay, so the ring-necked pheasants are not actually found from here. I know we use them a lot to kind of show off, hunting in, Pennsylvania. Ring-necked pheasants are all over a bunch of different symbols and for hunting and wildlife and all that sort of stuff, but they're not actually from Pennsylvania. They're not from here in the North America at all. But we released these more colorful birds, and people then pay for a hunting license to hunt these birds, and that in turn actually then helps to fund conservation. But that is under normal circumstances where these birds actually aren't affecting the environment very much. But due to avian influenza, the RSPB decided that it was not worth the risk, because you're technically taking, for the most part, a lot of time, game birds are reared off-site in big bird houses, and in those kind of environments, avian influenza can more easily spread because, well, there's more birds all huddled together. It's why they told us during COVID to not huddle together, to get away from each other. Slows the spread. So they didn't want to then release a very high likelihood of birds with this avian influenza out into the wild, because then it could cause a huge threat for the wild birds. There have been about 10 outbreaks of avian flu at game bird rearing premises over in the UK. So yeah, it's not theory, it really can happen. About 55 million pheasants and red-legged partridges and 2.6 million mallards are reared in captivity each year over there, just to be released into the countryside to shoot for sport. And that is a lot of potential spread of avian influenza. So for now, you know what? They were like, you know what? Let's pause it. We don't want to encourage any more damage to the possible environment. And let's just take a pause this year and see what happens. Because for the time being, avian influenza is pretty much running rapid. As for people in America, I tried looking it up, and so far from our reports, the government hasn't stopped any game bird releases so far here in the US, even though avian influenza is still very, very prevalent here. And the three main non-native game birds that we release over here are pheasants, huns, and chukars. So yeah, taking a year off would be extremely helpful for the environment that is currently under stress, but unfortunately over here it is a little more complicated than that, especially since, like I said, most of the hunting of these bird species then help fund conservation projects and is a major part of environmental funding here in the United States. So you take away that hunting ability, you take away the funding that is purposely going towards possibly helping out birds with avian influenza. So a little more complicated than that over here, but hopefully avian influenza will be controlled and birds can have nice, safe, happy lives again. Then our final article is coming from BBC News, which is, can enhanced rock weathering help combat climate change? So what we're talking about here, or what the article is talking about, is that they are currently digging up in large quantities in quarries with extremely heavy machinery to find what they're calling magic dust. All right. And it's pieces of balsite. It's a hard volcanic rock that is neither rare or technically particularly remarkable for any bit of thing, but it is a enhanced rock weathering that can help cool our overheating climate. And if you're lost, that's perfectly okay. Let me explain. So obviously planting trees is one of the most natural ways of getting rid of just all of the CO2. And what it does is it captures the CO2, it puts it down in its roots, and then it kind of gets buried into the soil. And then it becomes kind of a carbon dioxide sink. Now, most climate scientists now recognize that just simply stopping or eliminating all of our CO2 is not just impossible right now, but also we need to create a negative. So just stopping it all, it's kind of already in kind of the snowball going down the mountain effect where it's already rolling. So we can't just stop adding snow to it. It's already this big raging snowball rolling down at us. But we need to do stuff to actually stop it from moving. So like I said, the trees, they're great, but we can't just keep planting trees everywhere. Hence why these enhanced rock weathering systems may work out fairly well. Now, what it does is the idea is you can take this volcanic rock, and one of their best suggestions is you just scatter it in fields, like farmers' fields. They show where they have like the big farm equipment literally shooting these little rocks all over their farmer's field. And when the rain falls, the rain absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere. And then when that rain goes into these volcanic rocks, the volcanic rocks are so porous that it actually helps capture the CO2. So these rocks become like little CO2 jails, preventing the CO2 to leach back out into the environment unless a plant or other such device that needs CO2 can then use it. Because these little rocks also then, the idea is when it rains, will also get washed in the ocean, which is already a big CO2 sink for this earth. But the cool thing going back to the farmers' fields is because plants use CO2, and actually you can help encourage your plants to grow by adding active carbon powders, or that's why forest fires are so important, because it adds carbon back into the soil, which then encourages plants to grow. Is that they've actually done studies in these little gravel pebbles that are collecting the CO2 from the air, then also helps enhance the plants in the field. So not only are the CO2 being captured and stored away, it also is helping the farmers out. So it's kind of a two birds, one stone kind of situation, or in this case, one CO2 problem, one farmers need better food for their plants problem, one stone situation. This process will be able to actively decrease the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere. And then, of course, hopefully the company doing all this, their idea is to hopefully spread about 185,000 tons of balsite, and hopes by 2025 to have removed millions of tons of CO2 that will then drop down into the ocean, especially since in 2022, for comparison, the world discharged about 37 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Now, of course, there's natural CO2 being, breathed out by us and other animals. But obviously, we've been tracking this since like the 1960s, where that number used to be way, way lower. So hopefully with these magic rocks, we can start healing our planet. And that is your environmental news. So since I've been gone for a bit, I wanted to talk to you guys today about an animal that is pretty superb, I have to say. And since it's my first day back for about a month, I figured why don't we start off with the really incredible, superb lyrebird. Now, this animal, by the way, is pretty much one of the biggest liars and tricksters in the environment. Okay, we talked about the little spider that could mimic an ant. This guy's lies and copying of animals is so to a key, it's scary good. Now, the superb lyrebird is found in southwest Australia and some parts of Tasmania. Now, normally they're found in rainforests or kind of the wetter woodlands of these areas, but for the most part, they are a large songbird that sort of has a pheasant shape to them. For the stats for the superb lyrebird is that they can live about 20 years and can reach a length of about 31 to 39 inches or 79 to 99 centimeters, which includes their tail, which, especially for males, is fairly long itself. Because not only is the tail longer, the males are a little bit bigger as well, with females weighing about 2 pounds or 0.9 kilograms and males weighing in about 2.4 pounds or about 1.1 kilograms. So they're a fairly decent sized bird. Now let's get a little shallow and talk about their looks. The superb lyrebird looks a little bit like a large brown pheasant with pretty powerful legs and a long flowing tail. They are primarily gray-brown with a reddish outer wing. Their bills, legs, and feet are black. Adult males have a ornate tail with a special curved feathers on either side that assume the shape of a lyre when it's on display. While the tails of the females and young males are also long, but they lack those specialized feathers. And you might have heard me say their tail takes the shape of a lyre. That is why they are called lyrebirds. And I will admit, when I first heard of lyrebirds and what they did, I thought that their name was because they lie so much. But when you look at the name itself, it's not actually spelled the same way as lie or liar. So I just assumed it, even though it was staring me right in the face. Now, most of us, unless we live back in ancient Greek, probably don't know what a lyre is, because what it is you might have seen it in Hercules, the cartoon, or if you watched any sort of Greek history shows or anything like that. It is that kind of fancy looking harp that kind of looks like a horse hoof kind of thing. That's what an actual lyre is. So when the male lyrebird actually lifts up his tail, it kind of makes that like weird horseshoe looking harp thing for his feathers. So yeah, it's spelled Lyre for lyre the instrument, and not lyre as Liar. Yeah, little fun thing there. Now, superb lyrebirds feed on insects, spiders, worms, and occasionally seeds. It finds food by scratching with its feet through the leaf litter. They spend most of their time on the ground during the day, but will fly up into trees to roost at night to stay away from predators as they sleep, which is only the real time that you ever see them flying into a tree is just to get up there at night to escape danger. Or if something really spooks them, they'll fly, but these birds really aren't built for flying, especially not long distances. But if a predator were to show up, yeah, they're going to get out of there, especially because their predators include things like large snakes, lizards, and depending on the age, thanks to human, feral dogs, cats, and of course introduced foxes are all now top predators to this lyrebird that normally wouldn't have to deal with them. And if they were to be seen by the predator, they would fly off, or they would also make a very loud alarm shriek, warning any other lyrebirds that may be in the area that a predator is near. And it's better to be very loud for them, since most of lyrebirds are solitary. Maybe younger lyrebirds are still hanging out with mother, but for the most part, lyrebirds extremely solitary. And to make sure they stay solitary, they will use a variety of cackling and whistles to communicate to other lyrebirds where their land is, and basically give warnings of, if you step on it, I'm probably going to mess you up. But that's not true forever, because with every antisocial creature, including humans out there, they'll have a spot of socialization every once in a while. For the lyrebird, of course, that's breeding season, which comes in around June to October. And during the breeding season, the superb lyrebird special talent comes to light. For the male lyrebird is one superbly talented bird. But first, he needs to set up his stage. So he gets into his territory in order. He makes sure that no one is trying to sneak in, and then makes about 1 to 2 mounds of dirt piles in which he will use as a stage to dance and sing his song of seduction. Now, his dance is very extravagant. He throws his tail or lyre looking tail up, forward, and over his body, and he will shake that booty on display while moving around the stage, making sure he makes big movements. He will also then start singing to attract a female over to breed. Now, this song is the thing I want to talk to you guys about today. Now, there's a good chance you might have seen these guys singing because they're all over a lot of the BBC nature documentaries, all those guys, because it's so freaking cool, because this is no ordinary song. It is estimated that on average, 80% of Lyrebird's song is actually a mimic of sounds and noises it hears in the forest. For example, it will copy cuckoos, hawks, parrots, kookaburra, koalas, dogs. Really, any animal noise it hears, it will mimic it with almost 100% perfection, even freaking out and making kookaburras and parrots and hawks call back in response, thinking that there's a possible rival in the area. But it doesn't stop there. It also will make sounds that are not from nature. For example, they actually can mimic the sound of a chainsaw starting up, a chainsaw cutting a tree, a camera taking a picture, even the sounds of a camera shutter or rewind on some of the older cameras. It can mimic those sounds almost perfectly. And I gotta tell you, when you check it out, because of course you're gonna check it out, it's pretty freaking weird. Now, it is a little bit sad that their home is clearly under threat from humans coming in from all those fascinating sounds. And it really is crazy, however, when you hear a perfect chainsaw noise coming out of this bird's mouth. It kind of feels like someone dubbed a chainsaw noise over this bird calling, but it came from BBC, so it's trusted. It definitely is making that sound. They didn't dub it over or anything like that. And you can simply YouTube it, and there's a number of videos out there. A fantastic one, of course, like I keep saying, from the BBC, with the amazing David Attenborough narrating. So you can watch that right now, and it's amazing on how good these guys can copycat. Now, all these songs, hopefully, the males will kind of come up with their own song from all these different sounds. And they will come up with different combinations of sounds from what they hear from their territory. And of course, their own personal opinions on what sounds work best for their own personal song, because every song is different. They might have similar sounds, but the pattern and the noises they choose are all different among the lyrebirds, which is important because it's the song that will decide if the female is willing to breed with him. So that's why they really need to show off. And if she doesn't like the sound, she will simply walk away and leave him alone to keep singing in hopes for another female to appreciate his clearly amazing talents. But if the female is impressed by that amazing voice, she then allows him to breed with her, and hopefully then he will pass on his genes for clearly good taste of music. Unfortunately, like famous artists, the lyrebird is very much the same, where he is one of those classic drama musician dads, where the father ends up being pretty much absent. He will breed with multiple females during the breeding season, not helping to raise any of them. The females, after she breeds with the famous artist, goes off on her own and builds her own nest by herself and incubates her egg alone, being a strong, independent woman she is. Now, she typically builds this nest on the ground or on rocks, tree stumps, or in caves. The nest is constructed of sticks with a soft lining of ferns, roots, and feathers. She lays a single egg that is brown to purple in color. After about 50 days, the egg hatches. The chick remains in the nest for about 6 weeks, then mom spends time with it teaching all of the different ways of how to survive as a lyrebird, which normally takes another 6 to 10 weeks. They are not the most mobile birds, so even though it may be time for that chick to move on, they normally don't go that far away, sometimes being neighbors to their own parents, which normally in nature is kind of a problem. For the most part, nature purposely tries to kick family members further and further away from their parents. That way that there doesn't end up to be any confusing, detrimental genetic inbreeding going on. But for the lyrebird, it actually takes them a while to get sexually mature because young males don't even grow out their lyre tails until they're about 3 to 4 years of age. And for the most part, lyrebirds don't start breeding till 5 to 6 years. So the chances that their parents are still around by the time they are ready to breed is not very likely, especially with a lifespan of about 20 years. So kind of the reason why they don't have to go far away is the chances of inbreeding then becomes much less. For how the population is doing. As a whole, they are considered from the IUCN Red List as least concerned population decreasing. So currently the population is doing good, but the trend of the population is going down, so the status can quickly change. As for the reasons the population is decreasing is the problem almost every single animal in Australia faces. We just talked about it about the Batong a month ago. So sorry, this is kind of a repeat, but to hammer this ideology home, it is because the continent is full of thousands of animals, super unique, found nowhere else in the world. So many Australians fight to protect their native wildlife. But due to climate change, which is creating new weather patterns, and of course, some of the most dangerous wildfires. I mean, remember when we had that huge one in 2020 and the news showed all the koalas and other animals getting dangerously burnt and losing millions of acres of habitats due to climate change and changing weather patterns is definitely becoming more dangerous for the Australian wildlife, where climate change is being seen more often than in some areas. Also, remember when we thought that in 2020 the Australian wildfires were going to be the biggest, scariest news that year? Boy, were we wrong on that. Other major things, of course, are human development. Obviously, the lyrebird is copying chainsaws going on in its wilderness, so obviously the loss of trees and habitat is a big thing with them. But probably some of the most destructive are the issues going on with invasive species brought in by humans, which obviously was a big thing with the Batong as well. There are a variety of invasive animals, but the three major ones that affect superb lyrebirds specifically is dogs, foxes, and cats. Now, foxes were brought in for hunting for kind of high-end reasons because British royalty were hunting red foxes. It was a tradition. Rich people did it. And Australia was a British territory. So they purposely brought in red foxes so they could keep up to those traditions. Unfortunately, because it was like bringing your favorite video game, but unlike video games, the foxes bred uncontrollably and became a huge devastation and outcompeted most of the animals found in Australia. Currently, there are about 1.7 million foxes in Australia. Along with foxes are, of course, feral dogs, who also, like foxes, are out competing and eating all the wild animals. But the very worst of all three, of course, is the top biggest devastator in not just in Australia, but in the world, cats. Yep, cats. Currently in Australia, there is an estimated population of about 2.1 million feral cats, but that doesn't take into account all the people that let their cats outside saying, no, Fluffy doesn't go that far away, which can encompass 6.3 million. And there's been tons of research on people that think that their cats, when they let them outside, that they only stick to their backyard or they don't go far away. But every time scientists then put on a GPS tracker, find out these cats are going way farther, if not a mile or longer away from their home, even catching things that the owners never knew, whether it be birds, rodents, or diseases. These feral cats and house cats are causing huge devastations all around the world, especially in Australia when they carry something like toxoplasmosis, a disease we covered pretty heavily with the Batong, but luckily for the lyrebird isn't the biggest issue. Really, it is just the cat being one of the biggest predators in the world, especially since even though it's a small kitty versus like a lion, small felines in general are considered one of the top predators naturally, with many small felids around the world having one of the best predator hunting rates, more prey animals more often, more efficiently than even their larger cat relatives. For example, African lions will catch prey about 30% of the time, but a lot of small felids like sandcats and black-footed cats are considered one of the best hunting ratios out there, where they could catch their prey about 70% of the time, meaning that when small felids put their mind to it that I want to eat that bird, there's a very strong chance they're going to actually eat that bird. And of course, we did spend 5,000 years taking a species of cat and transforming it into domestic cats, but for the most part, we purposely kept in that hunting potential, since the biggest reason why cats became domesticated in the first place was to help out with rodent and other pest problems. But unfortunately, they're not picky. They're going to find whatever food they want. So doing things like catios, as well as just knowing that not only by releasing your cat out into the wild without supervision, on a leash, in a catio, or whatever, not only are you putting your cat at risk to predators, you are putting the wildlife in your area at extreme risk. All right. It's like releasing a shark into a lake, pretty much, people. That's how dangerous these felids are to native wildlife. And by not letting them out, we can keep our good friend like the superb lyrebird safe and calling for years to come. And that's our show. Thank you guys so much for listening about the superb lyrebird. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, make sure to check me out on my social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, and of course, TikTok. And if you ever want to communicate to me directly, you can always reach out at ericlikesanimals@gmail.com. But thank you guys once again for listening. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I'll see you all next time.